me, yada yada yada. Therapist, yada yada yada. Me, yada yada yada. Okay, hi, hello. It is currently March 3rd, which means that it is time for a February reading wrap up. In February, I read 9 books and DNF'd 3. I will go through the books that I've read and finished and then talk about the ones that I DNF'd at the end. I'm currently in the middle of, I believe, 4 books, which is kind of my average at any given point in time. I'm reading probably 1 physical book, 1 ebook, and then 1 audiobook. And then sometimes I have one that I add to that just because I'm putting off reading a different book. So I'm sitting at 4 books that I'm currently reading in March. Okay, the first book that I read in February was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I was very hesitant going into this because I know that it is talked about at the same time as like The Secret History is. And I read The Secret History last year and didn't love it. I kind of felt like it dragged a lot and I wasn't invested in the characters that much. So I was very hesitant and worried that If We Were Villains was also just not going to live up to the expectation that I've kind of set for myself. I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. I liked it a lot more than The Secret History. Found the characters to be more engaging and the plot to just move a lot faster. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, I enjoyed it more The Secret History. I liked the characters. I liked the plot. It was a good book. It was a fine book. The next book I read was House of Psychotic Women by Kiera Janice, I believe is how you say her name. It is part memoir, part nonfiction, in that she weaves a lot of horror movie tropes and discussions and facts into her own life and how she relates to different horror elements. And I really enjoyed the first, I would say maybe fourth of the book. But as the book continued, I felt like she was using talking about horror movies to kind of avoid talking about her own thoughts and feelings in regards to her own life. And I just started to get really bogged down with all of the facts and all of the discussions of these horror movies. And I felt like it really kind of took away from her and her story because I think that she has a very interesting and engaging story, but how she was choosing to tell it just got so bogged down. I think we could have done with a lot less tropes, or maybe just focusing on a handful instead of the many, many, many examples that she had for each trope as well. And it would have been a much shorter book and I think a much more impactful book. So I gave that a 3.5 out of 5. The next book I finished was a very interesting book that I picked up. It did end up filling out a spot on my bingo card, and that is Veil of Ash by J.L. Willis. I personally know Willis as a person in my real life, and so I was very excited when I found out that they were publishing this book. I waited until it was actually completely published to read it. I had the opportunity, I could have been an ARC reader, but I chose not to. And it was really exciting to see all these positive reviews coming in for someone who was very close friends with in high school. So it was very exciting to see that for them. And I read it because of them. This is not a book that I would have picked up in my own life outside of knowing the author. And that is because it is a fantasy book with sci-fi and romance elements. I'll talk more about this book when at the end of the year when I go through my bingo card, but basically it is, how did I describe this plot? Our main character is captured by these people and has to basically go on this entire journey, I suppose. I don't want to say too much because I just don't want to give it away because I went in kind of blind and I really liked where it went. It is part fantasy and part sci-fi and had a very interesting religious system too and very like spiritual system that I thought was really interesting and really engaging. The writing was really well done and for a debut, I think it was a really strong debut. I also usually don't read the second book in series. I find that I'm satisfied after the first, but this one I'm not. I cannot wait until they come up with the second book because I want to read it so bad. So I gave this a 4 out of 5, and I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. So I highly suggest you go out and read it for yourself. Um, it was really good. I liked it a lot. Okay, the next book I finished was Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I started this in April of 2025, and it took me until February of 2026 to finish. I so I read Beloved last year as well, and or maybe it was in 2024. In the past couple years, I read Beloved, and I absolutely loved it. I thought the writing was really strong. I thought the characters were really strong. I loved the plot. I was so engaged with Beloved. I think it ended up being in the top 5 books that I read that year. And so I was really excited for Song of Solomon, but I just could not connect with the characters in the same way that I could with Beloved. And with Morrison's writing, a lot more of the book is about the characters and their development and their thoughts and their feelings, and not as much the plot. So not enjoying the characters made it really hard to enjoy the book. I just wasn't I didn't really care about what these characters were going through. I didn't care about the family dynamics, and they were kind of confusing at times if you weren't fully paying attention. Part of that I think is because of Morrison's writing style, which is really good but can be a little confusing if you're not fully grasping what's going on. So that's why it took me so long to read. I was reading the ebook for a while, and then when my loan lapsed, I just kind of let it go and hadn't really thought about it. I ended up picking up the audiobook, and that is honestly what helped me get through it. Okay, I also just want to state really quick that usually when I would not be enjoying a book like Song of Solomon as much as I did, that I would have DNF'd it. That's definitely a new thing in my kind of reading journey, is that I actually will DNF a book, especially with like a library loan. Most of the libraries that I have access to, the loans are 3-week loans. So if in 3 weeks I haven't made substantial progress, or I'm not like devastated that my loan lapses, then that's usually a sign for me. However, the only reason why I continue to read this is because it is on my banned book list, and I am hell-bent on reading every single book on that list, and one day, I pinky promise, I will make a video explaining what that list is and why it means so much to me. So, usually I would have DNF'd it, but it's part of an arbitrary list that I am holding myself accountable to, so I had to keep reading it. So I gave it a very unfortunate 2 out of 5 stars, and like I said, I think that's fully because I just could not connect with the characters in the way that you really need to enjoy this book. Okay, the next book I read was Housemates by Emma Copley Eisenberg, and it was just a big miss for me. This is a book where 2 roommates go on a little road trip. Part of the road trip is because of like this artistic grant that one of the roommates has, and then the other part is going and collecting or dealing with the belongings that a teacher has left for them, the other roommate. And I just this should have been a story where in this road trip the characters learn and develop and open up, and like you learn about them and their lives and everything. I feel like that is usually kind of the road trip trope, is that at the beginning and the end of the road trip they're very different people and they go through kind of this emotional change, whether it's a positive or negative one. And I just did not feel like that happened in this book. I feel like the characters were very stagnant. I feel like they started the book the same way they ended the book. I thought that some of the like, I hate to say like woke preachingness, but there was a lot of like woke preachingness in this book that I just did not appreciate. The book was also framed by this like omnipresent narrator that allegedly knows these 2 characters, but that never gets explained. We never know who this narrator really is or why they're so interested in our 2 main characters. And so that was also just really weird. And overall, it just was not for me. I did not like these characters. I thought they were really annoying, and their lack of growth and insight just didn't make me enjoy the book at all. I gave this a 1.5 out of 5. Okay, next is Girl in the Creek by Wendy N. Wagner. I thought that this would be a very interesting book because last year, I believe it is, I read a lot of books about like rot and rot as a plot device. And I thought that this would be similar. I've also read a couple books now where like a mushroom or a fungus is like the horror. And so this seemed like it would be kind of right up my alley with those plot or with those tropes and plot devices, but I ended up not really enjoying it that much. I thought that there were just a couple too many characters. By the end of the book, when all of these characters kind of are all together fighting this like fungus and figuring out what's going on, I was getting just kind of confused on who was who and what one particular motive was versus the other. And then once characters started to die, I also didn't really care because I didn't feel like we had a lot of depth with any one character. And I also really hated the ending of this book. It was kind of like it was very cliche in like the worst ways possible. Kind of like one of those like smirking at the camera at the end, like, ah, if only they knew what my evil plans were. So I didn't like that. And I also didn't like the explanation for the fungus, which I'm not gonna spoil, but if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I didn't like it. It fell very flat for me. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Okay, the next book I read is Where I End by Sophie White. And this was really good. I really enjoyed this one. It is about a girl, her mother, and her grandmother who live on this island in Ireland, I believe. And they are outcast from this very like superstitious village that is on this island. And it's kind of about how they care for the mother who is, and I'm going to use the author's term here, a vegetable. Um, there's an author's note where White explained that she kind of drew inspiration for the mother character from her own family and dealing with her father. And she states that to call what he was and what the mother is, anything else kind of sugarcoats it in a way that she doesn't like. So to use her words, the mother is a vegetable and they have to, feed her, bathe her, clothe her, do all the things for her, and the kind of like strain and emotional stress that causes our main character. It was just very interesting. The entire time I was reading this book, I pictured everything as just gray and just a very dreary setting, not a lot of color. And I think that White does a really good job at painting um, such a dreary place. It was really good. It was so haunting, so just like unnerving. The way that our main character talks about her mother was just so intriguing. I loved it. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, and I highly suggest you read it if you like those kind of like darker horror books. There's nothing explicitly like scary in the book, but just how it is written gives this like eerie and haunting just feeling that I loved. Okay, the next book I read was Nobody's Girl by Virginia Roberts Guffrey, I believe is how you say her last name. And this is the memoir that Virginia wrote about her time as a being sexually trafficked with Jeffrey Epstein. Really, really, really good. She did a really good job about giving the background and insight into how someone could end up being a sex slave and in sex trafficking, how these predators know who to look for and how to recruit even more people. She also discusses her own feelings of remorse and just sadness about her part that she had also taken place with Jeffrey and in recruiting other people as well. Talks about the fear that these victims might feel and how getting out and just leaving isn't as simple as it might seem. So I think she did a really good job bringing sympathy and empathy to people in that situation, because I think it's so easy for us to say that the girls could have left. If they didn't want to do it, they should have just left, when it's not necessarily that cut and dry and simple. She did such a good job on this memoir. I believe, I know it was in the Goodreads Choice Awards. I don't remember if it won for memoir last year, but I know it was in the candidates last year, and I very much understand why. It was really good. I really liked it. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Okay, and then the last book that I read in February was The Snow Child by Erwin Ivey, and I really liked the first part of this book, like when they are establishing the relationship between our main characters and the kind of love that you can tell they have for each other, and then bringing this child into things. I really enjoyed that. But by about a third of the way through, I would say, the plot just started to feel very, very repetitive, and that the same thing was happening over and over again. And it just kind of got boring. The depth and character development kind of stopped. And I also started to realize that a lot of the characters were just kind of very one note, very like they didn't have a lot of depth. So when these very emotional things happened, I didn't really care as much because I didn't have the depth that, one would want from these characters. For instance, that takes place in like 1920 in like the Alaskan frontier, and one of the characters, her entire shtick is that she is a macho woman and doesn't like dresses because she is a pioneer woman. And like I get that, but it just kind of got really redundant. I also really hated that even as we move through time and this like snow child gets older, she's towards the end of the book, I believe she's 17 or 18. She still talks and acts like a 10-year-old, and that really bothered me. She still acted so naive, and I just could not buy into the fact that this was supposed to be a young adult or older teen, because she still read so much like a child. So I gave this a 2.5 out of 5. Like I said, I really liked the beginning of the book, but as it continued, it just dragged. And I kind of had to slog through it, not gonna lie. Okay, as mentioned, I DNF'd 3 books in February. The first book I DNF'd is Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Kimmerer? This is the same author that wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Now, I know that people love Braiding Sweetgrass. My husband read it, loved it. Very emotional book. I've only ever heard positive things about the book. So I was really excited to read Gathering Moss because I have not read Braiding Sweetgrass. So I thought, Gathering Moss might be cool. I live in a very mossy environment now, and I thought it would be very interesting to learn about moss and the different cultural aspects there. But I just didn't like how the story was being told. I didn't like how each chapter was just a little snippet, and I didn't feel like I could really connect with Robin as a person or Robin's kids, and I wasn't learning about Moss in the way that I really wanted to, and the cultural impact just wasn't there for me either. So I DNF'd it. It wasn't working for me, and I need to let books go more. So I DNF'd this at about 34% of the way into the book. Maybe one day I'll read Braiding Sweetgrass and I will go back to Gathering Moss, but as of right now, I no interest. No interest. The second book I DNF'd was Women and Children First by Elena Grabowski. This is a book where it is told from multiple different perspectives, and each chapter is a different perspective. And it is about a girl who has died in this very like close-knit town. And that sounds fine, but the point of views that we were reading through just weren't that great. I didn't love the people. I didn't care about the people, and then by the time I finally did start to care, it was a different perspective. And I felt like for a book that the catalyst of the events is a girl dying, it wasn't being talked about enough. We weren't learning anything about her or about how she died or anything like that. So I think I DNF'd after I think the third perspective switch because I was like, this just isn't working. It just it felt very superficial. And again, I didn't like finally getting to understand the person that we're listening to and then just to be switched again. And we were also just like thrown into the next person's life. So it was very jarring to go from perspective to perspective, especially because like the it'd be like person A would mention person B, and that's kind of it. So we kind of know who person B is, and then it would switch, and now we're into person B's life. And person B is kind of mentioning their relationship with person A, and then mentioning their relationship with person C, and then we jump into person C's life. But it wasn't like I knew this character and then moving into their perspective. I felt like I just vaguely understood this character and then got brought into a new one. So I didn't like it. I DNF'd it about 33%. And then the last book that I DNF'd, and this is probably one of the shortest and quickest I've ever DNF'd a book, and that is I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tekeboki. I hope I'm saying that close to correctly. And that is by Baik Sahi. This is a memoir between Sahi, who is a client of a therapist, and it is basically their transcript of each therapy session. And so the entire book, at least the part that I read, is like me, yada, 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 therapist, yada, 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 me, yada, 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 therapist, yada, yada, just back and forth. And it was so just like abrupt. And I didn't feel like I don't mind reading a transcript like that, but I would have really liked and appreciated and enjoyed if Sahi actually gave like what their analysis of that session was and how they felt after and what they were learning about themselves. But that wasn't happening. And so it was just really boring and wasn't exciting to read or listen to. And it was so short, so I didn't feel bad DNFing. And I was, even though I DNF'd at like 12%, about 17 minutes through the audiobook, it just wasn't working for me. It just was not working for me. I think there are much better memoirs that actually have analysis about what people learn in therapy, and this was not one of them. Okay, that is every book that I read in February. Compared to January, I think I had a definite worse reading month. I had a couple really amazing books, but I also had a lot that were just kind of meh or not that great. I think that in the next, couple months, most of the books that I read in February, I will have probably forgotten about and won't be able to tell you the plot, which happens, I think, if you read as many books as I do. But it's not, I think it's also indicative of the types of books that I'm reading and my enjoyment of them. So hopefully March is a bit of a better month. Like I said, I'm in the middle of a couple different books. An audiobook that I'm really enjoying. I finished an audiobook yesterday that I did not like. Will be explaining that one. But yeah, we'll see. I think March is a good time to kind of change gears and move into more spring related books that are a bit lighter, not as dark and heavy and filled with snow. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think that's all I have. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you will tune into the next one. Okay. Peace and love. Bye.